So, Catherine, the Neurodiverse Safe Work Initiative emphasises the importance of adapting health and safety management systems to accommodate neurodivergent employees. Can you provide some specific examples of such adaptations and explain how they enhance both safety and inclusivity in the workplace?
Yeah, look, that's a very good question. And I think that this is a specific recommendation that we give employers. And the reason we recommend this is because, in my experience, most health and safety management systems are designed to suit the majority of the workforce with the assumption that most people think and function in roughly the same way. But what the research is telling us now is that what we call neurodivergent functioning, and by that I mean people who have autistic, ADHD, dyslexic type brains, it's far more prevalent in the population than most people realize. So it's estimated that 1 in 5 people in the world are neurodivergent and have what we call one or more specialist thinking skill, and 65% of these are of working age. So it's reasonable to estimate that roughly 1 in 10 workers in every workplace will be neurodivergent. And so that's a substantial minority. So the employer may not realize it, but they already have a neurodiverse workforce. And the problem with it, though, is that neurodivergent people think, learn, communicate, regulate attention and emotion, perceive and respond to risk, and experience the physical environment differently from neurotypical workers. And so if the health and safety management system is designed around neurotypical functioning, then the system will fail to manage risk and potentially even increase risk or introduce new risks to a substantial minority of the workforce that think and function differently. So let me think of an example. I worked with a client organization a little while ago who in the pharmaceutical industry and manufacturing pharmaceutical products. And they asked for my help introducing a respiratory protection program to protect workers from an odorless, colorless fume that causes eye, skin, and respiratory tract irritation to workers during a particular 2-hour window when a product was being manufactured. And so among the controls that we determined to protect workers, one of those controls was that we recognized that during that critical 2-hour window, staff needed to wear respiratory protection, and the respiratory protection that was identified as being most effective was a full face mask. So that was fine. The workers that were selected to work on this production line they all went through the baseline respiratory function testing. They went through the fit testing. They were trained. They had their competency assessed, and we were all good to go. We went into production with this new product, and everything was fine, except for one worker, and we'll call him Joe, who was observed by workers and his supervisors just fiddling with his mask, loosening it, adjusting it, sometimes even pulling it away from his face, and sometimes even walking away from the production process and taking it off for a little while. And this went on for a few shifts, and the more people pulled him up on it or reminded him or questioned him about it, the more agitated he became. And so this actually resulted in his supervisor giving him a warning and asking me to have a chat with him. So long story short, having this conversation with Joe, it turned out that Joe is autistic. So he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome as a child, which is now what we now call level 1 autism. And he'd never told his employer because it never really been an issue for him before. But the problem for Joe was that he could wear this face mask for the 10 or 15 minutes that was necessary to demonstrate competency, but to wear it for the full 2 hours was just excruciating for him. He couldn't stand the pressure of the mask or the texture of the mask on his face or the smell of the material of the mask. And the longer he wore it, the more agitated he became, and he just had to get it off. And so the problem there was that the well-intentioned employer, in introducing a control to protect workers from a physical hazard, had actually not only failed to effectively manage risk for that worker, but also introduced a secondary psychological risk. And so in that case, and because we didn't consider, like the employer hadn't really involved workers that much in deciding, well, okay, we need a face mask. What face mask? This one will do. There hadn't been a lot of broad consultation. And there hadn't been a lot of broad consultation in selecting people to work on this manufacturing process. And so Joe was just picked amongst a number of other workers. And I guess what we needed to do, and the solution in that case, was we revisited the risk assessment for Joe and with his supervisor. And it meant, obviously, he wasn't going to be able to do that work safely. There was no way that we could control that risk. So what we actually did was we found a higher order control. If you think about the hierarchy of control, PPE always comes last. So we went higher up the scale and we found an administrative control, which meant we put him on a different shift on that day when that product was being made and swapped him out for a different worker who could. But I guess had the employer consulted with workers more openly and considered the sensory processing differences that often come with neurodivergent functioning, then maybe we would have been able to create or assess the risk more realistically for Joe and not put him in that position in the first place.
No, that makes perfect sense. And it sounds to me like that ends up being a win-win situation all round for the individuals involved, not just Joe, but his co-workers, as well as the business. We've got a more engaged workforce by them, performing at a higher level.
Well, we also have to think about how accessible is the system. So often health and safety management systems have components where workers have to, obviously they need to read safety instructions, they have to read reports, they have to fill in reports like pre-start checklists and complete safe work method statements and so on and so forth. Well, how do you do that if they're predominantly hard copy paper-based systems and you have dyslexia? Or you have dysgraphia, which means you can't express yourself well in the written word. Whatever's in your head doesn't come out of your hand easily. Or what if you have ADHD and you can't sit still? You can't read, like you have to read this instruction and you can't concentrate on it. So we need to look at making management systems more accessible to people who have different learning styles and to accommodate people who are neurodivergent. And there's lots of resources that we can use for that. Even things as simple as ADHD and dyslexic friendly fonts. So if we have systems that are online, we can adjust. If they're just built into the system so workers can turn them on, if they need to read a document, read it using the dyslexic friendly font, well, they don't even have to ask for help. It's built into the system and they can read the document without having to ask for a reasonable adjustment. So the environment is less disabling, the more flexible it is.
Fantastic. And you mentioned tools, and one of the tools that your organization offers is the Neurodiversity Workplace Profiler. How does it function? What are some ways it can assist organizations in better understanding and supporting their neurodivergent workforce?
Look, thank you for asking that, because this is a tool I'm really proud of, Campbell. So the Neurodiversity Workplace Profiler was originally developed by an organization called Do It Profiler in the UK under the leadership of the esteemed Professor Amanda Kirby, who's one of the world's leading authorities on neurodiversity. And so we proudly partnered with them to bring it into Australia and to adapt it to the Australian context. So it's predominantly a tool designed for individuals to complete. And we offer it. We offer a coaching session afterwards to help people understand it, but understand the reports that it generates. So they basically go through. It's 4 modules. They complete. It's a bit like going through, say, doing a Myers-Briggs or a DISC. If you've ever done any of that sort of personality profiling as part of your work. It's the same sort of process. You go through a whole heap of questions and then it produces a number of reports, and it helps the individual understand why they are the way they are, why they function the way they do. We're very careful to make sure people understand that it's not a diagnostic process. It's not a diagnostic report. You can't use the report to say, if it says that you have ADHD traits, you can't use that report to, for example, request stimulant medication from your doctor. But it can help bridge the knowledge gap where the worker is wanting, they know they're struggling at work and they want some help. They're not quite sure what they want. The employer doesn't know how to help them. So this report can actually produce some ideas for some adjustments that can be made to the workplace to help the worker perform work at that level they want to perform it at the high standard they they want to perform at. So it's predominantly a tool that's designed for individuals, and any individual can access it via our website, and we offer a coaching package afterwards to help them interpret the report. But when employers provide it for employers, for workers, they offer it. Obviously, nobody can be required to take it. It can be quite a powerful tool because, for example, I worked with a wonderful client recently called Inclusi, and you might see on our website and on LinkedIn the interview that I had recently with their CEO. They offered it to all of their workers, and it was taken up by 50%, which is about 20 of their workers. And what that meant was the individuals got this insight into themselves and had a coaching session with me to help them identify those areas where they needed support and what they could do in work. But more importantly, from the employer's perspective, the data that I was able to pull out of those reports, obviously it was anonymized and depersonalized, but I was able to pull out a substantial amount of data from those reports and turn it into a high-level report for management to say X% of your workers have difficulty functioning in these areas, and these are some things that you might be able to do to change your workplace structure and your systems to accommodate these workers. Or X% of workers say they really love this about the workplace, so keep doing it. So the report that came out of it for the employer was quite powerful for them in being able to, I guess, take a snapshot of their organization and what their people were telling them at that time and give them some ideas for some further ways that they could adapt and accommodate their workplace for not just their neurodivergent workers, but for all workers. Because, a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
And I think that's one of the really important things. It's about providing everyone with the opportunity to do their best. And that's exactly what this allows workers to do. And then surely that is of benefit to the organization as well.
And one of the things I love about the report is, we tend to, when we think about neurodivergent functioning, autism, ADHD, whatever, we tend to focus so much on the deficits, what the person struggles with, what they can't do, what they need help with. And certainly that's all there. But neurodivergent brains bring tremendous skills and strengths and abilities to the organization as well. And the profiler tool and the report helps draw all of that out and produces the report that says to the individual, look, these are your key strengths and these are some possible strengths. So how can we bring those out so you can capitalize on those strengths at work, as well as trying to find ways to support the areas where you're challenged?
Makes perfect sense. It really does. In your experience, what are some of the most common misconceptions employers have about neurodiversity? How can addressing those misconceptions lead to more effective inclusion strategies?
Yeah, well, look, I think one of the most disturbing trends that I'm seeing at the moment from the people that I work with is there seems to be sometimes an assumption that when a person discloses their neurodivergence to their employer, so they go to their employer and say, I have ADHD, I'm struggling in this area of my work, and I just need this little bit of help, I need this adjustment, whatever. There seems to be a tendency for the employer to suddenly view that worker as being a problem or a troublemaker. And the barriers go up, and they're just barriers based on unconscious bias and misinformation. I've even worked with workers who've, until that point, worked at very high levels and been awarded, had performance awards for the high standard of performance that they've worked under. And the minute they disclose this to their employer, all of a sudden they're under increased scrutiny. Their leave breaks are monitored, their work performance is monitored, and suddenly they find themselves, that increases their level of stress, and they're not getting the adjustments they need, but all of a sudden they're just viewed as a troublemaker. And it's really sad to see, because often these people, people who are neurodivergent, we all want to come to work and do our best, but we all function differently. And so we all need different things to be able to perform at our best. And so the other thing I notice is often employers, there's a tendency when a worker asks for adjustments under the Disability Discrimination Act, for example, for HR to ask them for proof. So they want to see a medical certificate or a doctor's report to prove that the adjustments are needed on genuine disability grounds. And I do understand that, like, employers generally are well intentioned and they don't want to do anything in the workplace that's going to cause this person to have for their experience to be worse. They
Mm.
don't want to make it worse. So they want to get some medical advice to know that they're doing the right thing. I understand that tendency, and I've been in that position myself. But the problem with that approach is that for most adults in Australia who are neurodivergent, a diagnosis is simply inaccessible to them. They know they're neurodivergent. Maybe they have children who've been diagnosed with ADHD or autism, whatever, and they see all the same traits in themselves. They identify as neurodivergent. They don't necessarily identify as disabled. There's a different thing. The neurodivergent identity is different from any disablement they might experience, which is usually a construct of the environment. But they're just asking for some adjustments at work. Now, the problem is with asking a neurodivergent worker to provide proof is that's an inherently discriminatory process if the proof the employer is asking for has been inaccessible to the worker. And if you think about it, we wouldn't ask a member of the LGBTQI plus community to prove their sexual orientation before granting them, say, carers leave to stay home and care for a same-sex partner, and nor would we ask for proof of cultural identity before asking a member of the First Nations communities. Before if they ask for cultural leave, we wouldn't ask them to prove that it's genuinely required. So why do we need proof of neurodivergence when all a person is asking for is some adjustments at the work so they can perform at their best? But there just seems to be this assumption that, oh no, it's a disability, I've got to get doctor's advice. But why not first believe the person, make the adjustments, and see if that improves things? But then there's also a fear, I think, that employers have that if they make this adjustment for one person, they're going to have to make it for everyone. Which is, and I think typically this has happened after, we were all working at home during COVID. And for a lot of people who are neurodivergent, the home-based work environment was very good for them because they were all able to control their environment all of a sudden. And now, of course, then employers are wanting to get people back into the workplace. And so, where neurodivergent workers say, well, look, I perform at a higher standard when I work in my home environment. I can control the environment and the distractions. You've had no problems with my productivity. Can I just keep on working at home? There's this assumption that, oh, well, if we grant it to you, everyone will want it. But that's really not the case, because actually not everyone does want to work at home. Some people prefer, for whatever reason, to work in a workplace, and some people like a hybrid model. So why not just allow people to work in an environment where they can all perform at their best, So I guess those are some misconceptions. It's the assumption that the person is going to be a problem. It's an assumption that they're a troublemaker. It's an assumption that they're only going to bring challenges and difficulties, and they don't focus on, look, what are the great strengths and abilities that this person brings to the team? And if I don't adjust the work, then I'm potentially going to lose the worker, and I'm going to lose all those strengths and unique talents and abilities as well. And so it's counterproductive.
100%. And sounds to me like it's an awareness piece within organizations. It's really understanding that people are different. Here's another different aspect, in the same way that culturally we can have different members in our workforce, and sexual orientation as well can be different as well. I'm conscious of time. What's one key takeaway or recommendation that you could make to people watching the video today that might help them and their understanding?
Really hard to focus in on one, Campbell. You put me on the spot here. Look, I think for most employers, I would say focus on neurodiversity awareness training first. If we start, because neurodiversity awareness training starts to open minds, we can dispel the myths and misconceptions, we can challenge people's unconscious biases, and we can start to shift the narrative so that instead of, I quite often get phone calls from employers wanting my help with neurodivergent worker, and they come to the conversation, oh, problems, this worker is such a problem, we've got performance issues, we don't know where to go with it. And often the first thing I say to employers when they tell me about the worker is I say, congratulations. You have a worker with a unique brain and unique abilities, strengths, and talents, and you have no one else like them in the workplace. So how can we capitalize on those strengths and abilities? It's about shifting the perspective from the doom, gloom, and the misery, oh, there's such a problem, to say, hey, how can we capitalize on this person's unique strengths and abilities? But you can only get there by educating the workforce, not just the workers. I mean, you need to start at the top. We need to educate boards and leadership teams and managers and supervisors and workers to see all workers as different. Like thank goodness, we're all different, you know, and the only thing that makes us the same is that we are all different.
Oh, that's wonderful advice, Catherine, and it's always a pleasure listening to you on this topic.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to present to your audience, and I'm very happy if anybody wants to get in touch if they need any more information.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Campbell. Bye-bye.